Hi, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to be having a look at how we can support families to reduce their screen time. It's a topic that's becoming more and more prominent. People are conscious that we need to be aware of our young children's screen time, which is great. So, we're going to look at some of the stats and look at some ways that we can support the families, but also reflect on our own practice within the nursery too. I'll just leave that there for a moment. For those of you that haven't been to one of our Early Years Stronger Practice Hub webinars before, we are based in Bradford. We lead the area across West Yorkshire. But for today's webinar, we're welcoming people from across the country. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the things that are happening around screens and our young children. And some of these stats I still find quite shocking. So 98% of 2-year-olds are watching a screen every day. 52% of 3 and 4-year-olds are online for 9 hours a week. 1 in 5 of 3 and 4-year-olds have their own smartphone. And 75% of 18-month-olds are exposed to screens on a daily basis. But I think the one that jumps out for me at the moment is the one around social media. There has been so much talk about the social media ban and children under 16 not having access, but all the focus appears to have been around the impact that will have on teenagers. 37% of children aged 3 to 5 are using at least one social media platform themselves. And I think I'm right in remembering that 1 in 5 of those children is doing it on their own without an adult present. That's quite a shocking statistic. And we know that, throughout all the work that we do in early years, that what happens in those early years impact on our behaviours as adults. So if 37% of our children are already using one social media platform before they've started school, then how is that going to look in 10, 15 years' time unless we do something? And, we'll have to see how the ban works in practice, and, implementing it, I am sure, will be very difficult over the first few years. But it's something that we need to kind of think about and embrace to support our children. I've also put a couple of pictures on there to just get us thinking at the start today. These are genuine products available on Amazon, although I think the last time I looked, the one on the pram was unavailable, which was reassuring. Hopefully it's been taken down, not because they've sold out. But this device here is designed to clip to the pram so that your child can watch it while they are going around the shops or out for a walk. And I've put one of the reviews there that somebody had commented, and I think the review is possibly even more sad than the image itself. This parent had said, "My baby loves watching videos during our strolls, and this holder makes it convenient to set up at the perfect angle." How sad is the baby? How sad is that situation where the baby is enjoying watching that screen when they go for walks, when actually they could be connecting with everything around them, whether it's in a leafy park and you're looking at the leaves on the trees and the sunshine bouncing through them or the rain bouncing off them, or whether it's cracks in the pavement, or whether it's litter and it's a crisp packet blowing up in the air. These things are interesting and help babies' brains build, and to be completely kind of focused on what's on the screen instead and missing everything that's happening in the world around them is so sad. I'm also going to share a personal observation. I was out for a walk with my daughter a couple of weeks ago, and to be fair, the child didn't have a screen. They were forward facing like this one is, and being pushed from behind. But the parent had headphones on and was watching a screen. And my daughter, who's a teenager, actually said to me, how's he going to hear if his daughter is saying something to him? And I thought, yeah, that is really sad as well, that they are disconnected, in that space where they could be, enjoying the silence together if they don't want to communicate with each other, or just chatting about the things that they're seeing around them. The other image here is of a tray that can go on the high chair, that has a special slot in it to slot your phone so you can look at your device while you're eating your meal. I'm going to come on to this a little bit later about what the impact of screens can have, but eating whilst watching a screen is really not good for our physical health as well as our mental health. We're going to go into breakout rooms now and just have a few minutes together to have a think about what screen-related behaviours you've seen at drop-off and collection times in your setting. And we will come back together in a moment. Thank you. To summarise, these breakout rooms discussed things like children arriving and then becoming upset when a parent takes a screen off them and they need to go into the room, and it taking quite some time for the children to settle. People talked about parents not engaging with their children either on drop-off or collection because they're too busy on their telephones, and even a lack of eye contact with their children when they're picking them up at the end of a busy day. So these were kind of core themes really across all the groups that had their breakouts. So the DFE has now launched 2 lots of guidance related to working with the under fives. The first one with the green background is part of the Best Start in Life campaign work, and that is a parent-focused guidance. So that gives kind of some of the top tips of the amount of screen time and some things to do instead. There is a link at the end of this presentation, so do go and have a good look at that guide. And then we've also now very recently been given the piece of guidance for how we use screens and support families with screen use as early years providers. We were really pleased to see this piece of work come out, this webinar that you are at. We have been running this webinar for 12 months now, and we were quite proud and reassured to see that the guidance completely aligns to the same sorts of guidance that we've been saying, and talks about some of the issues that we've been saying in those webinars. I'll give a little bit more detail on those as we go through the presentation. So what is research telling us about screen use? So there's 4 kind of elements here, that it's not just about the screen time itself. So I've deliberately used the word here, screen use. It's not about screen time, it's about what that is displacing. So when children are on screens for long periods of time, it's reducing those opportunities for conversation, for imaginative play, for physical activity, for reading, for social interaction. And you all know how important all of those things are to support our early brain development. So if we're on the screens, the children are on their screens, they're not getting those chances to do the things that really build the foundations for early learning. One of the strongest predictions of children's screen use is parental screen use. Again, we're probably not surprised by that because we know that we are role models. And young children learn what is normal by watching the adults around them. So when phones are constantly present during meal times, during play, during conversations, like I say, when on drop off and pick up, then screens, children quickly learn that screens are a central part of daily life. Research and professional guidance coming out now highlight concerns that when screens are regularly used to calm and upset children, they begin to kind of connect that association of screens with comfort, and it's a really vicious circle, and it's really difficult, to kind of know how to stop, and obviously it's easier if it never started, but for so many children, it has become the distraction. And I'm going to share an example here of one of our team, whose daughter was less than 2 years old and was quite poorly, and she went to the doctors, and she was upset and she was crying because she wasn't very well, and she was sitting on my colleague's knee and having a cuddle, but the doctor was kind of struggling to hear what my colleague was saying and have that conversation. And the doctor suggested to my colleague that she gets out her phone and gives it to her child to settle her. Now, my colleague was, empowered and had enough knowledge to know that what she was saying was wrong. But how do we think many of the parents that we work with in our nursery would feel, if the GP is telling you that that's the right thing to do to settle your child? Then that kind of gives that message that that is the right thing. And so, yeah, it's possibly one of the most challenging ones. And when we had those breakout rooms, people were talking about children having that phone taken off them as soon as they arrive at nursery, and a meltdown, I think, was the phrase that was used. Begins. And it's that sort of thing. It's really challenging. And kind of linked with the predictors as well, that screen use just becomes embedded in family routines, during meals, before bedtime, sometimes actually in bed as children are going to sleep, in the car, or when they're waiting. And once those screens become that default response to boredom, then it becomes a habit. It becomes, it's displacing all those things that we talked in that big corner. So everything is really connected and really impactful. So what the DFE guidance is telling us, from the research about screen time, is that the evidence suggests that too much screen time is associated with poorer cognitive and behavioural abilities in children, such as reduced verbal activity, reduced vocabulary, and can be associated with developmental delays, reduced attention, and lower executive function. Again, we've done some of this research ourselves as an organisation, and as I said, we've been running this webinar for about a year now, so we're getting messages from all of you, and we are consistently hearing that same message, and I'll come on to some of those comments that we've had a little bit later. Oops, I've flipped past 2. So part of the work that I do in my other part of my job is leading a project called 52 Things to Do Before You're 5, which is kind of like a bucket list of low or no cost activities for children to do without a screen, that are all kind of underpinned by pedagogical knowledge. And it's an initiative that started in our nursery for our parents to support the home learning environment and to build partnerships with parents. It's now available across 20 or so local areas across the British Isles. But part of that work, we launched a campaign called Less Screen Time, More Playtime. And our thought process as we were kind of going through that was looking at what screen time is actually impacting on. So we kind of spent a few weeks looking at lots of research and gathering different perspectives, and we came up with these kind of like core themes. So language and communication. We've seen briefly before, and we will see comments again, but we know from what we're hearing from practitioners that the way children are speaking and the amount of words that they're having is changing, and it appears to be in line with the increase of screen use. And Speech and Language UK are now reporting that there's 1.9 million children with speech and language challenges, and that's increased again with the use of screens. We've been looking at healthy eating patterns. So I mentioned that photograph right at the beginning. Research indicates that toddlers exposed to screens during mealtimes are more likely to develop habits of eating in front of screens, which is then associated with higher consumption of ultra-processed foods, and also a lack of awareness of what children are eating and for how much they are eating. They don't learn when they're full or not full. And I'll give an example here. I'm sure we've all experienced that moment when we've been in the cinema, we've got a big bag of popcorn. We are totally engrossed in the film, and we're just, eating. And then we put our hand in for the last bit, and it's gone, it's empty. And we haven't been aware that we've eaten that whole pot of popcorn. And every so often, that's not the end of the world. But if that's becoming every mealtime, that you're not aware of what you're eating and the amount and whether you're full or you're just kind of doing it, going through the motions because you're gripped with what's happening on the screen, then that can have a very different impact on our children's weight and their understanding of their relationship with food as they grow older. Also linked with the weight is the active lifestyles. So it's not rocket science. When children are sitting on devices, on screens, they're not being physically active. And so research is reporting that physical activity levels for children are lower than recommended, and many are not getting the minimum amount of exercise needed for their age, for that healthy growth. And that leads to obesity, and a lot of other areas around our development, our bone strength, our muscle strength, and everything. We need as a species to be outside, to be running, to be jumping, to be growing our muscles, that's a really important part of our development. Sleep is something that came up quite a lot, and the research is showing that using screens too much, especially before bedtime, can make it harder for children to get to sleep. There is some argument that this is linked with the blue light, although there are some people that are saying this isn't linked with blue light from the screens. But also the mental stimulation is interfering with falling asleep. And again, we've heard from a lot of practitioners over the last few years that more parents are coming into their settings saying their children can't get to sleep, but they're also describing scenarios at home where children have got a screen in their cot to help them fall asleep. So again, we're talking vicious cycles here. And I would also say, if we link back to the previous one, when we've got active lifestyles, when we are spending, a core part of our day running around, being physically active, being out in the fresh air, it makes it easier for us to fall asleep in an evening, not just children, all of us. So then we've got regulation. And that's kind of, we've talked about that already. But yeah, excessive screen use can impair the emotional comprehension and can promote aggressive behaviour. So it's that vicious cycle of, giving a screen to help somebody regulate is actually more likely to cause more issues with dysregulation, even though it might be an instant gratification. And the final one was around eyesight. Spending too much time looking at screens is causing children to become nearsighted. In 1990, about 1 in 4 children were nearsighted. By 2023, that's grown to 1 in 3, and it's expected to keep rising. And our eyes need exercise as much as the rest of our muscles. And it's really important that children have opportunities to look as far as they can. So, if they are using a screen for something, and this is even the same for us as adults, is making that time to just, go outside and just go and kind of look as far as you can, get kind of, the different light from being outside and not looking at a screen, is really important for our eye development. We're now going to watch a short clip from a video. This was made about 20 years ago, and there is some reference to screen use. It's around television screen. We're not going to watch the whole piece of this film, but we will give you the link. So if you're interested in the whole article, which is about how babies' brains are built, then you can go away and have a look at that whole film. But we're just going to watch a few minutes for now. I'm just going to stop sharing this screen and go to my other screen, because that always works a little bit better. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm a neuroscientist interested in human learning, particularly children and adolescent brains. The tools of modern neuroscience now allow us to look inside, while the owner of the brain sitting in a machine is learning. And what we're finding out in those studies is breaking new ground. And over the next decade, we're going to have the potential, if educators are listening and governments are listening, to completely revolutionize the way we teach our children, the whole educational setting. The bottom line is about neuroplasticity. It turns out that something our grandmothers knew, that babies learn really, really well, we can now instantiate with measurements of the structure and function of the baby brain as children are exposed to new material. Their learning capacities are limitless. And we probably should not be surprised by that, but there's a great deal to learn by doing the experiments to see what are the principles of human learning in infancy, and can those principles of human learning be applied throughout our lifetimes? I think it can. So let's just look at some of the simple facts. I think most of you have seen this graph. It's just plotting the size of the human brain over development. And by 5 years of age, the brain size is 92% of its total eventual adult size. Why is it getting so big? Because it's building connections. So if you look at birth, 86 billion neurons exist, but they're not talking to one another. The job of infancy is to connect all of the neurons with one another, learn to communicate. So those telephone wires are growing at a rate of 1 million per second in that early period. And by the age of 3, the baby has 3 times more synaptic connections than we do, and we have 86 trillion as adults. So do the math, think about it. And between that early developmental period and the end of puberty, we prune to specialize. So you've got this interesting contrast, the wide open, learn anything, ready for anything baby brain, and the adult brain with dedicated circuitry, pruned machinery that has expertise. So this trade-off between the wide open mind and expertise with dedicated circuitry is just very, very interesting, both highly valuable. A utopia of learning would be the dedication and expertise of our post-pubescent brains, our adult brains, and that openness of youth. That's a philosophical question we could entertain ourselves with for a long time. Our modern experiments are looking at the long-range fiber tracts. We can relate these kinds of measurements of white matter fiber tracts throughout the brain of the baby with experience and watch them grow depending on experience. This is just one child at 7 months, 11 months, and 26 months, and we're looking at myelin. So myelin is the brighter, the orange. The yellow is the most myelinated, and you can see the networks in these babies' brains grow. So the next time you talk to a 2-year-old, imagine the circuitry that you're lighting up as you speak to that child. So this shouldn't surprise you. Once you've looked at the human brain and how it's growing, here's a curve that comes from psychology. And you say, what's the capability of human beings to learn a second language across age? We're not equipotential learners. The babies are geniuses, right? Linguistic geniuses. From 0 to 7, we learn and absorb using implicit brain mechanisms, totally different from what happens as you reach puberty. Every 2 years after 7, there's a decline in the natural ability to learn. It isn't that you can't learn it, you're using different machinery, it's much, much harder. In fact, genes play a role past puberty. They don't in the early period. Everybody learns in the early period if you're a neurotypical child, but in puberty we can see the effect of certain genes on the capacity to do that new kind of learning. So we have been doing experiments.
我们要来讲一个故事哦。今天要讲的故事是
We're exposing babies to Mandarin for the first time during a critical period in development at 9 months of age. It's like having Mandarin relatives come and visit you and live in your house for a month, and 12 days they spend 20 minutes entertaining your child. What happens to their little brains when we do that? It's amazing. In those 5 hours of experience that they have in 20 sessions, they learn so much about the sounds and the words of the foreign language that they compete with the babies in Beijing and Taiwan with regard to how their brains react to the sounds and the words. They absorb it like a sponge. They learn at an incredible time in development when the window is completely open for that experience. When you do those kinds of experiments and you see that babies are unbelievable learners, you can't help yourself from doing this experiment. So after we saw how humans interact, the babies were responding to those Mandarin or Spanish speakers. We then put them in front of beautiful DVDs. What did the kids do? Crawled up to it, stared at it, looked entranced. Graduate students said, oh, they're going to learn. They're going to be amazing because it's so simple. It's all there. What did the study show? Absolutely no learning. The brain and behavioral test said genius learning in the complex social interaction setting, no learning whatsoever from the machine. Okay, so what's going on? The social brain is in control.
So that research, as I said, was 20 years old. Despite seeing this evidence that Kuhl's research showed, babies exposed to live speech develop stronger language skills than those exposed to screens. We've plodded along, maybe even run along. So just an interesting thing to have a think about with our work. This here is the advice from the World Health Organization, and this aligns with the advice that is now in with the DFE's guidance. And it's really important when we're talking to parents that we're not criticizing, we're not judging, we're just, need to be really careful that we are supporting and guiding and explaining why, and sort of explaining that element of what the screen time is displacing that we've talked about. So the advice from the World Health Organization is that children 0 to 2, screen time isn't recommended at all. And that children 2 to 3, it's no more than 2 hours a day, and ideally much less than that, especially as they're kind of nearer to 2. And then 3 and 4-year-olds, no more than 1 hour a day, which I'm sure you can work out. That's 7 hours a week. And if you remember that stat at the beginning, 3 and 4-year-olds, a high percentage of them are already online on screens for 9 hours a day. So already we are, exceeding that level. So I mentioned earlier that we've been having lots of conversations with practitioners, and we did a survey which we will be circulating again in the near future to find out what is happening in people's settings. And we've talked about a lot of these already in the webinar from the breakout rooms. those feedback sessions. But yeah, we're noticing delays in speech and language. We're noticing that children are not expressing themselves as clearly as maybe they were 10, 15 years ago, and that children are finding it harder to interact with others. And as one of you mentioned in the breakout rooms, that use of American words and accents, and learning things that they're hearing, rather than kind of engaging and really understanding that concept. You're telling us that children are showing a reduction in the ability to know how to play and to use their imagination, create their own games and stories. The attention span is much shorter and switching quickly between activities, and that they are getting more upset and more difficult to control their emotions. Like I say, all things that people have told us before, and you are telling us the same things. And finally, the delays in the physical skills, poor posture, weak core strength, because they haven't been, building that strength in their muscles and their bones, and getting tired when they're doing exercise. But also, different challenges. Some children more sleepy and withdrawn, others overactive because they've had too much screen time. But what it's really important to remember is we are not saying that all screen time is bad. And I think that often, that's how parents are hearing the messages. Our campaign, as I said, through our other part of our organisation, is less screen time, more playtime, not no screen time. And so I've put a couple of examples here of good screen time. Video calls with family. I'm sure many of us experienced that during lockdown when we couldn't get out and see our close ones, or you might have family members that live overseas. Having video calls with family is fantastic. I myself lived overseas when my youngest two were very little, and we didn't have this technology to be able to connect with family back home. And so, it's a brilliant thing to embrace. And you're having serve and return conversations, with grandparents. You're having that kind of social interaction. And so it is really important to clarify that, there are good ways to use the screen, and it can support language and emotional connection if it's used in the right way. Another example is watching something together, talking about what's happening on the screen, sharing that experience, helping them, consolidate that learning and understand what's happening, rather than that passively watching, which brings me right into that kind of the negative. Just to reiterate, it's passive watching. It's watching that content alone. It's, the phrase we use, it's that doom scrolling, it's the autoplay of the next thing coming on, and sort of no interaction, no conversation. And, sort of that reiteration that just because it says it's educational content, who's verified that? Who's saying it's educational? What's educational about it? There are no regulations around that at the moment. Anybody can say that their content is educational. And then using the screens to calm and distract. We've talked about this through those breakout rooms and experiences. It might feel like an easy win to give the phone to stop the crying, or stop the child being upset, but it doesn't help children get those self-regulation skills. It doesn't help children go through that co-regulation, and it becomes a vicious circle. So, but please remember, it's thinking about the fact that the screen isn't replacing the interactions that our children need the most, especially in their early years. So I'd just like to have a brief discussion. Just pop in the chat, please. How are screens used in your setting? So I've put some examples here, and it's the same things that you're popping in the chat. You use them as a communication tool with parents. You sometimes use them for rhymes at tidy up time, or when the children are coming in the morning. It's good to see that none of you are saying that you're using them at meal times, that the children are using them at meal times, and you might use them for a focused activity, a maths activity, or something like that. So that is what we're hearing. But we do need to be really, really mindful about our attitudes towards screen use. We know, we've talked about it before, that children observe and imitate our adult behaviour. So we've got to really think about what we are doing. We are really powerful role models. So in your setting, have a think about whether you can use books and singing instead of digital stories and songs. Making sure that meal times and snack times are completely screen free. And I don't just mean the children, I'm talking about us. So you can see here, there is an image of a practitioner in front of, some babies that are occupied. And the practitioner is taking that moment to do something. I'm assuming filling in observations or, writing up how many times they've had their nappy changed today, those tasks that need doing and that parents, want to see through the app. But is that the right space to be doing it? Is there a way in the day that we can find a space not in front of the children to do that? Because what you're doing is using your screen in a moment of calm. So children are seeing, okay, so this is happening. I'm picking, the adult picks up the phone. So when I'm doing this, as I get older, I pick up the phone, I pick up the tablet, I do that. So we just need to be really, really conscious. And I will say, I completely understand how difficult that might be. I have spent much of my career working in not-for-profit private day nurseries and supporting some chains. I've, particularly post-COVID, we know that the sector is stretched. We know that there aren't those opportunities that we may have had years ago to have an additional member of staff that can cover while we go out and we get time out to write up observations and do those things. I get that. But we really, really need to think about how we can maybe do it differently and how we can maybe try and find that space and do our best to not be using those screens in front of children. Maybe think about prioritizing face-to-face communications rather than device use with families. So yeah, it's, I've not got the answers to everything, and I hope you weren't coming here today thinking that, but we've got to have this conversation. We've got to think about what we're doing. We can use screens really thoughtfully. We can think about whether we're maybe out of their view, but we can also kind of use them to add appropriate context. Again, not saying no screens, just saying less screens. And so I have a lovely example from our nursery where we're really lucky enough to have a resident artist, and that artist was doing a piece of work on leopards. And, so the children were shown famous pieces of art that have leopards in them across different eras. There were leopard print cushions and fabrics and toy leopards. And, it was a really good kind of discussion. Leopards move beautifully. You can't, so gracefully, even when they're just about to sort of, go and eat another animal, they are beautiful. And we don't have leopards in Bradford. So the artist had found some video footage of the leopards and was showing that on a big screen, was having a discussion with the children at the time about it. And that is, just so important to use the screen to enhance our children's learning. And it's also our role to think about how we share messages with parents around screen use. can we find an opportunity to share data about the impact of screen use? Can you think about suggesting activities to do instead of screen time? It's all very well saying you need to stop using your screen so much. What are they going to do instead? When the social media ban came out, I don't know whether some of you saw, a teenage girl was interviewed and was asked, what are you going to do with all that time when you can't be allowed on your screen? And she said, stare at a blank wall. What we don't want is parents not knowing how to fill their time. And, we know as experienced practitioners the sorts of things that we can give our parents to do. I will just kind of flag up here, we do have some less screen time resources that we've developed for our 50 Things offer. These are free to download from our website. If you are a 50 Things to Do area, then it works even better because you can use it alongside, suggesting those 50 activities to fill that void. But even if you're not a 50 Things area, do feel free to use them as an inspiration. And, we're not precious about our work. We want to improve outcomes for all our children. So do feel free to go ahead and use those. So the new DFE guidance for settings is, I think I mentioned earlier, really well aligned with the work that we have been doing and what we've been talking about in these webinars. And so there are some practical tips that they have popped in here. Don't allow children to view screens in a passive way without any interaction from you guys. Only use them for really short periods of time. Have some screen-free zones in your setting. Avoid using screens with children during meal times and also around kind of, that sleep time. Don't just have them on in the background. They can distract from what's going on, and avoid using them for those routine kind of management times, calming children or just kind of putting it on at tidy up time. Try and think of other things you can do during that tidy up time. Put music on a CD player or through Alexa, but not with the visual screen there. And don't be used to just occupy children. So really useful. Just to reiterate, this is guidance at the moment. Might it change over the next year or so? Who knows? Let's see where we go with this. At the moment, it's guidance, and at the moment, it's just there for early years. Whether that's going to come in for schools, it will be interesting to see. Okay, so we're just going to go into our next breakout room. And again, 5 minutes. How do you currently talk to parents about screen time? What responses or challenges have you encountered? And what strategies have worked well for you? Thank you, everybody, for your feedback. That was, really, really helpful. We've had similar feedback before. So here are some of the key themes. It's difficult sometimes when you are wanting to build that strong relationship with families. You might fear that, that you're going to damage that relationship. For those of you that have heard me speak before, parent partnerships is so crucial for all our work. And, if you've got that really strong partnership, it's easier to have those difficult conversations because parents might feel judged, and you don't want them to interpret the conversation as a criticism of their parenting. And you don't want them to feel blamed or defensive, as you've just kind of flagged up in your feedback there. It's sometimes just that lack of time, parents who are running in and running out at the beginning of the end of the day because they've got work to get to and they've got other siblings to pick up, etc. You don't have time for that sensitive conversation. And especially when screens are everywhere. It's, and I say, the feedback that we've had is that straight away, when you start talking about this, parents often think you mean no screens at all. And so it's very hard to kind of think of reducing the screen time when it's literally there, all the time. We're sitting on a screen right now. And I've put this on from previous webinars about inconsistent guidance or mixed messages. I am really pleased with the DFE guidance that came out in a few weeks ago, because it feels like it's getting us to that place where we are going to have some consistent guidance. So we've got that guidance for parents from the DFE already. We've now got that guidance for settings, and obviously we've got our guidance as well. So, it's there, and we feel like we're getting, a good approach now. So I've just put in here, I won't go through all these, but I've just put in here, some thoughts, ideas of how you might be able to address the conversation. So I'll just leave that there for a moment for you to read. And then finally, just to let you know, I've mentioned the documents that we've got. Like I say, feel free to use these. The ones in the pile of 3, there are more than 3, but they're designed to be used by you as professionals to begin that conversation with parents. And then they can take that as a takeaway, but don't just hand them out to them. That's not how they're written. The idea is that it's got some opening of what's important for child development, and then an element of what the screens might displace, and the impact of that, and then some top tips. So the top one here you can see is about supporting language and communication. We have one on healthy eating habits. We have one on sleep time. We have one on bonding. So there are those different themes there that if you know that that's relevant to your families, you can take that, you can start the conversation. But like I say, they're not designed to just be handed out to parents. We've got posters. If you want to download and print them off and put them up in your setting, feel free. And then we've also, what we have got that you can give straight to parents is the top tips. And, if you are sharing the DFE's guidance with the parents, these top tips completely align with that. So, you can use both documents next to each other. And then there's some social media posts as well, that you can kind of download some of those assets off our website and use them on your own social media if you want to. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, we are in the process at the moment of refining those a little bit, but they were done in partnership with parents and practitioners to ensure the messages were short, non-judgmental, and kind of helpful for settings. So I'd just like to end with, asking all of you that have made time to be here today to join us and pledge to champion play, to nurture curiosity and creativity, and, help your families to have that healthy balance and, have more playtime and less screen time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.